thing I'm going to do on this block is oil pump. So we've got a brand new oil pump, and that is because I do not want to use an oil pump that has any metal in it from a previous engine. Always exciting opening brand new parts. All right, brand new Subaru oil pump. I am going to make sure all these are tight. They can actually back out sometimes. You don't want that, so I'm just gonna snug those down real tight. Oops. Then you are going to need some, I use RTV Ultra Gray gasket maker. I've always used that and it works well. You will need some brake clean or some sort of cleaners to make sure there's no oil on here or the oil pump face. And then you're gonna need a new O-ring for right here, which our master gasket kit came with one. So that goes right there. And then we're gonna RTV on the oil pump here, a nice little bead, put it on there. We don't want to go crazy because we don't want RTV seeping in where the oil is supposed to be. So you kind of have to learn how much you need to do. I believe on Subaru's service manuals, there's actually a spec on the width that you need. But I've done it enough times where I feel fairly comfortable doing it without that. And I like to cut off the small end as I can. We're gonna take our brake clean, make sure you got a oil-free rag. You're gonna go around every surface with some brake clean. Same on the oil pump. Sweet. First, I'm gonna take my O-ring, and to get this to stay in place, I usually put a little bit of RTV on it, and that will help it to not fall out because they like to do that. Just like that. Now we're gonna go right on the oil pump here with RTV Gray. And this is where that O-ring is, so I'm not gonna put RTV all around there. If I put a little bit too much or a little bit too little, I would always choose a little bit too much. Because if it's a little bit too little, probably going to leak. If it's a little bit too much, it most likely won't affect anything. Way too much is where you run into problems where it just is clogging oil passages. What I like to do now is lay it a little bit flat with my finger. Make sure there's no oil on your finger. You don't have to squish it way down, but I like to see it laid out a little bit smoothly. You get it to sit down a little bit. Just make sure it's stuck on there nice. You can also wipe off if you think you got too much. Like that. All right, looking good there. All right, we've got all this cleaned off. We got our O-ring in here, still set in there nicely. RTV is on. Now we're gonna put this pump on. You gotta line it up with the pins. The crank drive, I guess essentially you gotta line it up with. There we go. And there's dowels that it will go into. You do wanna see a little bit of squish of the RTV. That means you've got enough of it. All right, now I'm gonna look up the torque spec really quick. We're gonna put the bolts in and torque everything down. Torque spec is 4.7 foot-pounds. I'm going to torque it to 5 foot-pounds. All right, this is a decent torque wrench, but sometimes cheaper ones I don't trust, and so I'll test this on another 10mm bolt that doesn't matter if it breaks, but I feel confident in this one. It doesn't give me a sequence at all, but I'm gonna make my own. Double check everything. Perfect. And most all the way around, I see a little bit of RTV squishing out, which is what we want. Oil pump's done aside from our crank seal here and then our crank position sensor. But now I believe I'm going to move on to the oil pan. I have a Killer Bee pickup and baffle that I'm going to be cleaning and using. And then I have a factory oil pan that I just cleaned yesterday that I'm also going to be using. And same thing with this, we're gonna wipe this all down with brake clean, wipe the oil pan down surface with brake clean. And then once we have the pickup and baffle on RTV, put the pan on, bolt it down, torque it down, and then we'll be good to go with that. Oil baffle, freshly cleaned. Oil pickup with a brand new O-ring. I'm gonna put a little bit of oil on this O-ring, which is what is usually recommended, just like that. And when tightening the pickup down, I always like to start these ones right here, but don't tighten them, and I tighten these two down first. Those are the critical sealing part. I'll look up the torque spec for those. I'm guessing it's probably about 5 foot-pounds, just like the rest of everything else. 7 foot-pounds. So I'll start with these guys, and then we can do the rest of these. Sometimes it's really hard to get to this one bolt here, and so sometimes I'll take this little pry bar, just lightly move over the baffle. This one I might not be able to torque down because I could possibly get my my 1/4 inch on there, my 1/4 inch torque wrench, but I'm just gonna snug it up by hand. These aren't very critical, so as long as they're tight enough and you don't break them, then we'll torque the rest of them. retorque these down. I loosened them so I could move over the baffle. All right, we'll double check everything. Tight, 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 tight. Perfect. Now I'm going to double check that the pan is all clean and ready to go. We'll clean this surface off, clean the surface of the pan. We'll get some RTV on the pan and we will slap it on here neatly. I don't think that's the right word. We'll slap it on here properly. Oil pan is all cleaned out. I'm gonna wipe this down, wipe that down. I did put a new seal on here. Okay, get some nice RTV on here. This takes a while, but oh well. One of these engines I took apart recently had silicone in the pickup tube, and there was the amount of silicone everywhere. Oh my word. Okay, let's go ahead and toss this thing on here. Now we got a bunch of bolts to put in. Just putting this on here super lightly with this thing. I believe it's only 3.6 foot-pounds I saw. It's really easy to over tighten, so we don't want to do that. All right, let's get the torque wrench out. I like to go to opposite sides here. Oh, I missed one. That's why you double check. One in the back too, that would suck. One more time for good measure. I tend to be way over concerned and double checking of everything, but that's okay. Awesome. Pan is on. I'm gonna put the drain plug in, and we're gonna flip this thing over. Next order of business is the cylinder heads. Now I like to do one side at a time, so I don't like to bolt both sides down and then set valve lash on both and then put the cams in, all that sort of stuff. So that's what I'm gonna do. All right, usually I put the head studs on first, but I think I'm going to put the gasket, the cylinder head, and then the studs on. I don't know, just to try it, why not? Actually, scratch that. I'm putting the studs in right now. Scratch that again. I'm putting the head gasket and then the head on, and then I'm gonna put the head studs in second, which I usually don't do that, but we're gonna give it a try. And now we are going to clean everywhere where a gasket is going to touch. Now I'm gonna do the same thing to the cylinder head. All right, OEM Subaru MLS head gasket. Make sure you put it on the right way. That is not the right way. Time for the cylinder head. Just like that, it is on. Our freshly cleaned ARP head studs. And then per ARP instructions, you lightly thread in the head studs, which is what I typically do, but boy, do I sure take some engines apart that whoever put them in most likely did not lightly tighten down the head studs. 2007 STI listed for $8,250, and the amount of people that I've had ask if I'm interested in trades is insane. Maybe if it was a car that my wife wanted, or like a blown motor STI, that they would trade me plus cash on their end, something like that, but people just want to trade up for a bunch of random stuff. And I'm not interested. Freshly cleaned washers. Time to put the nuts on there. All right, now we are going to follow the ARP torque specs and torque sequence, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You do all of them to 30 foot-pounds, all of them to 60 foot-pounds, and then all of them to 90 foot-pounds, and you're done. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. 30. Now 60, and then unfortunately I don't have the 100% correct socket for my 1/2-inch one. If I'm being honest, I just used to use my dad's socket when I would need it. So let me see if I can find one here. Well, would you look at that? To have the right socket. What are the odds? Get the real torque wrench out. Now we are going to 90 foot-pounds. The Icon torque wrench must be pretty accurate, because when I start moving the snap-on one, it starts off right around 60 where we left off with the Icon. So that's kind of cool. All right, we're gonna check them all again. All right, there's one head installed, just like that. Now, I'm just gonna be fiddling around, setting the rest of the valve lash, making sure everything spins nice. When I got the cams all bolted down and spinning nicely, I will see you then. Alrighty, we got the long block all sealed up. I have to figure out how much I have for this thing, what I might need to order. I have some parts back here But we're gonna push this off to the side, and whatever clip you see next is what we're doing. So I'll see you then. What I'm gonna figure out next is what kind of setup I want, because I do have some deleted TGVs, but I'm kind of, if I can make something emission compliant, I'm going to. And so I think I'm gonna end up doing factory TGVs. I have all the air pump stuff, and then it's gonna be a stock turbo. And then I do have evap stuff for right there. And the car will be catted. It'll be pretty much all emission compliant, and I might as well just do that. I do have to find tons of little lines and stuff like that, and then we'll start with the timing. And then once that kind of stuff is mostly done, then I'm going to get the TGVs mounted up on the intake manifold, get the air pump stuff set on there. I have a new turbo cartridge that I'm going to use, probably this housing and that compressor. Just lots of random stuff that is all going to be time lapses or jump clips. And I also need to figure out how I'm going to tune this thing. I have an access port for it, or it does have ECU tech or ECU tech, however you say it, installed on the car currently, I think. So I'll have to figure that out. But whenever you see me next, hopefully we'll be rolling on getting this engine together. Picking along at this engine, factory manifold on there with the nice heat shields. Got most of this top stuff on. The next thing I'm going to do is the turbo. This is a VF39, which is the same as a VF43 and a VF48. They're all factory STI turbos. And I am putting in a brand new center cartridge. I ordered these on eBay. They usually come with a little gasket and O-rings there, crush washers. They come with a little syringe with oil just to prime the turbo. I have done a video on this. I will link that video. I'm not going to show this just because it's time consuming. Unfortunately, this is taking forever just because I've got so much little stuff going on, but we will get there eventually. I am waiting on factory fuel lines and rails. I thought I had a set, but these are from an older car. I am redoing the factory fuel lines. I'm basically building my own fuel stumble kit. I'll try and link that below. Also, maybe I'll just do a whole separate video on that. I also have to figure out something with the up pipe. This shield is loose on this one, so I got to figure that out. I'm also waiting on a knock sensor. I usually have all the parts I need for these cars, but I also typically pull one apart and put an engine in and kind of just take parts from the engine and put them on the new one. But that wasn't the case with this one. This one was kind of torn apart and pushed out and was heavily modified, so I don't have a ton of the stock stuff. I just figured I had it, but I guess I didn't. So some of the stuff I'm having to order, which just takes longer. This video might be a little jumpy and cutty just because I'm kind of doing things in stages. What's up, kitty? Come here. Hi. Come here. Hey. Do you like this turbo, kitty? That was the wrong bolt. What? Did it hurt your ears or something? Somebody taught me this, local to me here, that buys a bunch of stuff from me. You know who you are. If you tighten this down, when you've got new crush washers, if you give it a little tap, it'll go a little bit further because it kind of sets those crush washers. I do that now on a lot of the stuff. We're starting to look good here. All right, so we've got a lot of the long block all done. We got our nice new turbo in here. We've got our intake manifold now assembled. Fuel rails on there, the injectors, just stock injectors, stock lines, stock rails. Everything's gonna be mostly stock on this thing. Stock turbo, stock up pipe, stock header, air pump system, everything's gonna be emission compliant and just pretty factory. Next thing is we're gonna pop this intake manifold on here, and then we're gonna be getting close to dropping it in the car. I'm gonna order the tune for this thing tonight. Then we get it in the car, we can get everything assembled. When we get the tune, we can get that on there and get this thing fired up. Kind of nasty weather out the next few days here, so I'm not gonna be driving it anyways. We did get a new car dropped off today that you'll have to wait for an upcoming video to really see, but I'll show you a peek. The 08 through 14 body style, it is my newest one within that body style, and I've never had this color before. Little sneak peek, it is probably my favorite color of that body style, and I really want to get one in a hatchback. Unfortunately, that's not a hatchback. But we'll take a look at that in a later video. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see that down the road so that you can see when I post it. Let's continue rolling on this thing. There's been so many little intermittent projects that I've been doing in between. Now I actually have some time to get this thing bundled up and ready to go in the engine. Ready to go in the car, not the engine. All right, getting the intake manifold on these things can be a little bit of a chore, but my editor is going to make it look like I'm a master at this, and I get it on in one try, maximum of 10 seconds. Hello, Jade.
Hello. I don't see the talkie words.
What?
There's taco supreme.
Is there any
Dill pickle, bacon?
dill pickle or bacon?
Okay.
Let's do dill pickle. Usually they're not in the same section. Sometimes they're just on like an end shelf.
And I saw the talkie stuff on its own area, and I still couldn't find it.
Dang it. I've got my phone recording right now, and I have my mic on, so Ben's gonna listen to this whole thing.
Perfect.
Okay, you can get the dill pickle ones.
Okay, see ya.
Thank you. Bye. Okay, hard part is guiding this all on here while also getting the turbo hooked up to the turbo inlet. Look at that. Just making sure that we don't have anything pinched. Nothing goofy's going on. All right, let's get some bolts in here. All right, just lightly snugging all these down, and I'm gonna torque them down to just over 18 foot-pounds. Then we're gonna start plugging stuff in. 18 foot-pounds. All right, gonna go through, check them all again. It's looking like an engine. Okay. I'm gonna go through and plug everything in. I've got two broken connectors here. One's for the coil pack, the other is for the exhaust AVCS solenoid, and I'm gonna replace them with two good ones from another harness. Man, I'm an idiot. Here we go. Moses. Two more clips to replace. Woo! Moses. Dude, what are you doing? Dude, what are you smelling? Aside from clutch, flywheel, and some random hoses, this thing is pretty much ready to drop in the car. I do have to throw on this heat shield for the exhaust manifold, but we're getting close. I ordered the tune just now, about an hour ago, so we're really gonna be waiting on that to get the car running. But like I said, I wanna get this thing dropped in, ready to start up, and then we'll just be waiting on the tune to fire this thing up. I have a couple other videos that I'm currently filming as well, so I will be working on projects for that kind of stuff. But yeah, hopefully the next clip you see me throwing the flywheel and the brand new XD clutch on this thing. Kitties, what's up, guys? New pilot bearing. We got a nice brand new OEM XD replacement clutch. And the flywheel is just a machined OEM flywheel. All right, time to drop this engine in. As you saw, I just did the throwout bearing with the XD provided grease. I greased the slide pin as well. Everything feels nice and greasy. I have the transmission jacked up so that we can get the engine slid in nicely. Again, just double check everything's done on the engine so that I don't have to pull anything back out. One thing right off the bat, especially if it's a new engine, make sure one of those holes and one of those holes right there have these little dowel pins in them. These guys right here. So sometimes when you pull an engine out, they'll stay in the transmission, sometimes they'll stay in the engine, and then when you put a new engine in, sometimes they're mismatched and you'll be fighting yourself because it's just hitting dowel on dowel. So I just pulled the ones out of the transmission because the new engine came with the dowels in the block, so we're gonna go ahead and do that. Okay, let's get this thing in there. I really need to get some correct straps. When I worked out of my dad's shop, he had the correct straps that worked well, and I just have not purchased them for here yet. How are we looking? You're gonna have to try and sneak by the hood here. Might need to lift this hood up. I usually don't have to, but oh well. All right. All right, we're getting down to the close level here where we're about ready to start sliding into the transmission. Let me see if I can get a better view. Let's try that. What I'm looking for is on the bottom studs here. So you probably can't see, but all the way on the bottom studs, you put the engine on the engine stand. I'm looking to line those up with where they go on the transmission. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but the passenger side there just slid into that spot. Looks like we gotta go a fuzz lower on this side, right there. So I'm gonna say those lined up. Yep, now we can start pushing this thing forward. You definitely wanna make sure now that we are not pinching anything between the engine and the transmission. We do not want that to happen. Sometimes it just takes patience. Sometimes you actually need to spin the crank pulley a little bit. Sometimes the spline on the transmission and the spline on the clutch sometimes aren't lined up, and you gotta spin the crankshaft over a little bit, and that will get those to line up. So I'm gonna try that right now, see if that's anything that's holding us up. Ooh, the other thing I forgot to check. Okay, we are hitting. So that's what's stopping us currently is the engine's not high enough because the studs on the motor mounts are hitting the subframe. So I'm gonna go up a little bit like that. Make sure this stuff's out of the way. Look at that. Getting closer here. So when I get to about this point, this is the point where those studs I was telling you about, or the dowels, are going to meet the transmission. And sometimes those don't go together well, and they don't just slide right into place. So this is when I will take bolts. So I'm gonna put one bolt here. I'm gonna put one bolt diagonally down near the bottom. I don't wanna do two up top necessarily because I wanna pull it together evenly. So I'm gonna go like this one right here. And I'm gonna go down near the bottom over here. I'm gonna thread them in lightly, and with a wrench lightly, I'm gonna start threading them in. And if they get really tight really fast and this gap is not closing, we got something going wrong. We're not aligning how we should. So I'm gonna put some bolts in, and I want to be able to really easy by hand. I'll show you. Let me grab some bolts. So we're gonna go with one right here, and we're gonna go with one on this side. So we're gonna go not into one of the starter bolt holes. We're gonna go lower than that, right here. And I can already tell that the bottom is a lot farther together than the top. And so I'm going to jack up the engine a little bit more, and that gap should close down a little bit. See, I went too far there. See if this bolt will thread in. All right, let me grab a 14 mil. Where is my ratchet? One there, one there. There it is. All right, so again, we want this to be really easy. If this is difficult, we're either cross-threading the bolt or something is not going correctly. I'm not even putting much pressure on it. Baby could do this. So we're gonna thread this in. You can see the gap is getting smaller. Still really, really easy. You'll keep going nice and lightly. All right, now we're gonna thread the one. You can't see this one, but we're gonna thread this one in farther down here. This one I can actually do by hand until it hits the transmission housing. So this is still really, really easy. I think the bottom is almost together all the way. So now I'm gonna come back up to the top here. The gap is closed all the way. Now I'm gonna go until this one is tight. All right, this one's tight. I'm gonna set the engine down onto the engine cradle, and then I will show you what to do with that throwout bearing and clutch fork. I have the transmission jacked up, and I'm gonna lower that down. Now I'm gonna lower this engine down nice and slowly. See if it falls into place. The engine is in place. Now, this is not engaged. If you went and pushed your clutch pedal, this would just go right to the floor. See, this isn't hooked up to the clutch. The proper way to do this is you unbolt your slave cylinder from down here and move that out of the way. Usually, if you just move, you either move or you push this piston in on the slave cylinder. Make sure you don't overflow your slave cylinder. Can you see what I'm doing? Kind of. I'm gonna move this. All right, we're watching right here. Okay, this is the clutch fork. Like I said, the proper way to do it, remove this slave cylinder and it'll be easier. But I don't want to do that, so I'm gonna push this piston in all the way, jam the clutch fork that way, which pushes the throwout bearing into the clutch, and you'll know if it goes in or not. All right, see, before I could pull it all the way back, I could pull this back about this far. Now I can't, okay? Now it only goes that far. Let this piston go, make sure it lines up where it should on this clutch fork, and then we are gonna go test that this clutch works. So we're gonna jump in the car here. Now, if this clutch pedal does not work, we need to bleed the slave cylinder, but we shouldn't need to do that because we never removed it and disconnected the line. As you can see, this is tight now. Let's go test this clutch pedal. If you don't do this and you put the whole car together and you didn't put the throwout bearing in correctly or something, you're gonna have to remove the whole engine to fix it because there's no other way to get to it. I've done it before and I only did it once, so just watch the video so you don't have to learn the hard way. All right, we're gonna get in here. I'm short, so I need to move the seat forward. And we're gonna test this clutch pedal. All right, it kind of sticks. There's a lot of play in it. Oh, there we go. It's working. Look at that. You can see the clutch fork moving. Clutch is working. Again, most important part, I've actually seen it put in there backwards, like it was flipped like this and they would never engage to the clutch. You probably aren't watching this video, but if you are, you know exactly who you are. It happens, mistakes happen. I've done stuff like that too. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bolt the rest of this engine to the transmission, aside from the clutch bolts, because there's more stuff over there that I need to do and I need room. But that's how I do all of them. And it goes smoothly most of the time. Doesn't always go smoothly. Let's get on to putting this thing together more. The other very important thing, this plug that holds in the pin that the clutch fork is held in place by, do not forget to put that in. I've seen those left out before, and that pin can work its way out, and then the clutch fork halfway falls apart and you can cause some damage on top of a non-working clutch. So make sure to thread that in there and tighten that down. Cobb catted downpipe. So I bought an exhaust for this thing, and it is my favorite exhaust for daily drivers. An OEM Subaru option exhaust, Subaru SPT exhaust. They're not super loud, but they're definitely better than stock because they do have some sound, but they don't drone like an aftermarket exhaust. And that is why I love them. I'm test fitting this right now because I'm concerned that this downpipe is not correct for this car. Everything I could find online said that 08 or 05 through 09 legacy manual transmission downpipe is the same as 08 plus STI, and so I just assumed it would fit because this is pulled from a 08 legacy spec B that I had, but it looks too long and the mounting bracket on the transmission isn't lining up, so I'm test fitting this exhaust. It looks like it might line up. Okay, so it all lines up. Come on. All right, so it looks like it's gonna fit. I'll show you what I mean though. So I'm gonna bolt the downpipe down to the turbo the rest of the way, but this bracket is not lining up. I don't know, I'll have to look into that. I'm not exactly sure why, but the catback lines up, which is really the important part. We can make this bracket work if we need to. Let me get the downpipe bolted the rest of the way and we will go from there. I did get the tune. I want to try and get this thing started tonight. We'll see if that happens. So unfortunately, I believe I have the wrong downpipe. The bracket must be different on the Spec B or the Legacy Downpipe, even though it's a manual transmission, than these cars. So I ordered one from a shop down in Ohio. They have one that can get to me in a few days. I could still like put this together, but I'm not really sure if I want to put it together. The bracket's really pushing on the transmission mount, which makes, basically it's twisting on the turbo, which I don't really want to risk anything if there is any sort of issue that it's causing. So I think I'm just gonna push this off to the side, off the hoist, and I need to get going another part out. So I'm gonna pull in the rear wheel drive WRX that I've got. That will be in a different video, so you won't see it in this video, but next clip, hopefully we got our downpipe and hopefully we're putting this thing together, getting it running. All right, now we've got the correct downpipe. So that other downpipe from Legacy must be different. I don't know if it was originally meant for an automatic transmission or what. This one, would you look at that? It fits. You get that bolted down, get the cat back all bolted up, put the motor mount bolts on, and then we'll have a few more things to do underneath here, but then the rest is up top, most of it at least. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna route our 3-port boost controller. I'm also routing this emission stuff, and I've got that mostly figured out. We're routing these 3 ports. It's pretty simple. You can go on Grimspeed's or Cobb's website. They all have diagrams on how to do this. And I route these things the same, whether it's for an external wastegate or whether it's for a factory internal wastegate actuator. So port 3, the center port here, is gonna go to the nipple here on the compressor side of the turbo. Port number 2 on the left there is going to go to the internal wastegate actuator here. And if you have an external wastegate, that port number 2 would route down to your external wastegate, I believe to the side port, but don't quote me 100%. And then port number 1 there is going to loop over to our turbo inlet. And that is how I route those. There's different ways to route them, but that's how I do it. That's how I've done on my previous cars, and it works just fine. So that's what I'm going to do. After that, we've got top mount bracket to put on. The top mount will be about ready to go onto the car, and then AC, power steering, alternator, that stuff goes on. Air pump, wiring gets plugged in. I gotta finish building fuel lines, and we also have to pump E85 out of this tank. Then after that, radiator, coolant, oil, and then we'll be ready for first start, which I don't think will be today. I've got my brother's bachelor party this weekend, so it's not gonna get done as soon as I would like it to, but that's just how things go. Can't devote all my single time to working on this. I've got parts to sell, parts to pull, parts to list, all those sort of things. We do it as quickly while it's still doing a good job as we can. Let's get rolling. We've got our boost controller all plumbed up. We've got our evap stuff on here. I had to make a little bracket here for the intercooler because I didn't have the extender bracket that these newer cars have. The next thing I'm going to do is finish up my fuel lines. So I'm making my own fuel stumble kit. I cannot remember if I talked about this earlier in this video or not, but essentially all the fuel stumble kits that you see online, so like the Cobb fuel stumble kits or BCP sells one, there's a couple other brands that sell them, but basically one line is just a line like this, nothing on it, just some quick disconnect pieces, and the other line is the same thing, but it has a 04 through 06 STI OEM regulator attached. Basically, I'll try and link some of this stuff. I'm not super good at finding all this stuff and linking it, but I think it usually costs around 140, 150 bucks to buy all this stuff. I already have the regulator, so it cost me like 60 bucks or 70 bucks because the regulator I think was $80 or $90 if you have to buy it, but I have some stock fuel lines. I will show you what it is on the stock fuel line so that if you have one, you can use it. But it essentially eliminates the factory fuel line setup that has like 3 or 4 regulators, and it causes a fuel stumble when trying to tune it like right before 3,000 RPM. So we don't want that. So we are building our own fuel line kit here. I will show me building the last line. I already have one line built, but basically all it is, some Dorman connectors here, right there. So they are 5/16 fuel line connectors. That's what this is right here. And then I also bought these hose clamps, the ones that you actually clamp and they stay there. You can't see them because I also put some heat shrink over it just to make it look nice. Like I said, I'll show me putting the last fitting on and putting on the fuel pressure regulator, and then we'll mount that up and we'll save. I think the cob kits are now close to $400, which is crazy when you can build one for 150 bucks. So that's what I would recommend. It's super easy. You don't have to have a ton of tools. I think the only tools you need are something to cut the hose line, something to cut the hose with, and you probably don't even have to use these specific clamps. I just am using them because they look nicer, but you will need those clamps and the pliers wherever those went. Right here. A lot of the kits on Amazon just come with pliers, and I bought some Nip-X just because I wanted a little bit nicer of a pair. But that's all you need to do this. So go do it. I'll link a video to the one I watched, how I found this, and then I just did it myself. So I'll link that video also. All right, here is a 04, 05, 06, I think, STI factory fuel line setup. I believe it might even be the same out of, or 04 and 05 Foresters. But this is the regulator we need right here. So we're gonna unplug all these connections here, unbolt it, and then we're just gonna run our return line. We're gonna cut it right in half and put the regulator right in the middle. I will do that. This little vacuum port is just gonna go to one of the vacuum ports on the manifold, and then we should be good to go. But when you look up the kit online, it gives you a part number, what you can buy from Subaru, and it is a 04 through 06 STI factory regulator. So you might even be able to find a whole one of these fuel line assemblies on eBay or something for cheaper than just buying a brand new regulator. So search around a little bit if you're gonna decide to do this, and you might be able to just find this even cheaper than the $80 or $90 that it costs. All right, so this is our return line. This is our feed line. Feed line is done. Both ends, both connectors, clamped down and everything. Feed line, or the return line, I am just going to basically put this somewhere right in the middle. There's a spot that they usually mount it to. I want to say it's to right here. I'm not sure if I'm going to mount it. I might just zip tie it up there. So I'm going to kind of measure and see where I want that. But we just basically need to go from up there to right here on those factory hard lines. All right, so I got this regulator all cleaned up. I've got my line cut where I want to put the regulator. If this is the return line, they have, per the Cobb website, they've got the regulator mounted like this. So it looks like it's upside down, but this is how I'm gonna do it. I have to put the clamp on here and the, somewhere right here, and the shrink. But yeah, it's gonna go on like this. Then this line will go to the hard lines on the intake manifold, and I'll cut this to where I want and put the fitting on that side. Put that all the way on there. Grab my Nip-X pliers. That is not gonna come off. I'll put on this heat shrink. I definitely recommend using a heat gun, not a torch, but I'm gonna use the torch. The only reason I'm comfortable using the torch is because these are brand new fuel lines. There's no fuel in this, and this has been sitting for a long time and is thoroughly cleared out of fuel. Okay, does it look as good as the Cobb kit? No, it does not, but it sure is a heck of a lot cheaper. I just looked, and the Cobb kit is $375. So probably saving close to like $225. Crazy. A lot of money in my opinion. Getting this next side on here, and I'm kind of setting this hose up so it follows the natural curve of the hose, just like that. Clamp her down, heat shrink, just like that, and then we'll run this vacuum port to a port on the manifold, which I will show you. I'm going to go measure this and put the last quick connect fitting on. I'm gonna cut it right here. Try and cut it as square as possible, like that. On with our heat shrink, on with our clamp. Last fitting. Well, there is one spare, but the last one I'm gonna be using, just like that. Look at that. Here's our return line, here's our feed line. We just made our own kit, pretty simply. Again, I will try and link this. I'll try and link the clamp kit I bought. I'll link some heat shrink. It's just really Amazon stuff. Just go on Amazon. This one is specific. I'll link the number for that. This is just any generic kit like that. Same with the pliers. I bought E85 safe fuel line, and from what I could find, these were E85 safe, just in case this car ever does go on to E85. Not 100% sure, but it's all pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory, but I'll do my best to link everything so you don't have to go searching. So the vent line I have left stock. So that is the stock vent line with the little canister thing or whatever it is down there. Feed line is the black one to the top port here. So hopefully I measured right. We're gonna take our feed line, put that on there just like that, just like that. There's our feed line. And our return, I am gonna zip tie it to this bracket here, but we're gonna do the same exact thing with the return. Right under the turn hard line there. And I'm gonna, like I said, zip tie it or put a bolt on right there, just like that. Look at that. I did pretty good measuring. Feed line, return line. Here's the bracket I'm talking about right here. And I'm gonna either make a little spacer or zip tie it there or something. And then our vacuum port right there on the regulator is gonna go to that one right there on the intake manifold, right below the line for the brake booster. Then our fuel lines are done. The top mount is about ready to go on. I'm gonna clean that up, put a Y pipe on it, new gaskets, get that on there. And then we're kind of onto the front of the engine here. I'm gonna temporarily run an oil pressure gauge just a fully mechanical gauge with some of this. I'm gonna run that up somewhere and just have the gauge temporarily mounted up because I want to see oil pressure when we start it up and when I go drive it. But that's not gonna be routed nicely or anything because that's gonna get pulled as soon as we do a little bit of break-in, make sure everything's good, and then we'll pull that out. So let's continue to roll a little bit at a time. Because this is a temporary gauge I put in, I've just got it ran down right to here, an existing rubber grommet. So I've got it right there. I can just push it up when I want it, but I can look at oil pressure on startup and when I want to look at it. So that is what I'm going to do for that. I didn't want to have to buy any mounts or drill into anything when it's just going to be removed. So as simple as possible with no damage is the ultimate goal. Let's get the top mount intercooler ready to toss on, get that on there, and we might be close to getting this thing started up. We're of course going to turn it over first, build up some oil pressure, make sure we don't have any major leaks. I already did like a quick once over check to make sure that I think I've got everything done back here so that when I put the intercooler on, I don't need to go back and try and do anything. So I think we are good there. All right. This guy's gonna go on just like that. Intercooler's on. I am now going to hook up our fuel pressure regulator to the intake manifold. I think we're kind of done in the back here. We'll go on to the front. Kitties, row in. What's going on? Not much. Other than our copper oil line, which is temporary, this engine bay turned out very nice, very factory looking, which I love. I just like a nice, clean, factory looking engine bay, got our air pump mounted up. So the next things, this is where your heart starts beating a little bit faster, you're getting a little nervous. We're gonna put some oil in this thing, we're gonna put some coolant in this thing. I might start off with water because in case of a leak that I have to re-drain the whole cooling system, I don't want to have to waste a bunch of coolant. So I might do water, I'm not exactly sure yet. But oil, coolant, battery, and then we need to marry the access port to this car. But before we do that, I need to make sure that the ECU tech stuff, I need to make sure I don't need to do anything special for the ECU tech stuff if I need to do any sort of unmarrying with that. So I'm gonna figure that out. I talked to a tuner that gave me a few things to check to make sure I'm good to go. And then we'll marry the access port, get the tune loaded up, build some oil pressure, and hopefully hear this thing fire up for the first time. When you see me next, I should be putting some fluids in this thing and we'll be ready to get going pretty quick here. I decided to just put coolant in and hopefully that doesn't backfire on me, but we will see. As I'm filling up, I'm always checking on the ground to see if I have any leaks. Anything that would leak immediately would be something I probably forgot to put on. Leaks at startup are gonna be like once it builds some pressure, if there's a clamp that's loose or something like that. I have to pull off this hose here. I don't think it makes as much of a difference on these turbo cars. On the non-turbo ones, this is the highest point, or close to the highest point on the cooling system. So if you pull it off, you can see if there's coolant here. You hear all that air. Not sure if that could be heard on camera, but this level dropped and a bunch of air noise came from that hose. So I'm gonna add some more now. Basically, I'm just trying to get as much air out as possible before startup. We got a little bit of coolant, but I'm gonna see if we get more coolant this time. I'm gonna put that cap on. I'm gonna fill this up. Now if we pull this hose off again, we should get some coolant. Yep, here we go. Okay, got coolant. I think that most of the air is out of the system. Obviously, it's not perfect. Obviously, there's gonna be some air still in the system, but we should get close. Most of the time I can do this and I don't have to do anything else. They don't overheat, thermostat opens up, the temperatures look good. So that's my goal, because then I don't have to mess around with it once it's running. I don't see any leaks on the ground, which is a good thing. I'm gonna put some in the overflow tank here, just like that. Same thing with the oil. If I see a leak without starting this thing up, we've got a problem, because I forgot something completely. But I'm just gonna do this, make sure we're not pouring it out anywhere. Pour some in, take a look underneath. The main check is gonna be once we start, because we build oil pressure, then the cooling system starts to build a little bit of pressure. That's gonna be really the indicator of how we did. All right, I'm gonna check oil level here in a sec. Obviously it's gonna change once we get some oil into the filter, but I am working on this tune stuff right now. Once I get that figured out, then we should be good to getting it ready to turn over. I primed the fuel system and I've got one injector that's leaking. That one right down there. There we go. So one injector leaking. So I'm gonna have to figure that out. Could just be the O-ring was nicked when I was putting it in. It is a new O-ring, so I have to figure that out. I think I've got the tune stuff figured out, but I'm gonna dig into that and we'll see if we can get that fixed here pretty quick and go from there. O-ring's a little popped out. Always nice to actually find a problem. So swap the O-ring out, make sure we don't do it again, and we should not have a leak. Old O-ring, new O-ring swapped on, and we should be good. Go ahead and switch it off again. Okay, switch it back on. All right, I think we're good. All right, so the plan. Crank sensor unplugged so that the engine cannot start, and we want to turn this thing over until we build oil pressure on our oil pressure gauge. Then once we do that, we are going to, I think, probably top off the oil, make sure the coolant looks good, and then we're gonna go for the first start. Nothing so far. Sometimes it takes a little bit, unfortunately. I'm gonna check for any leaks here quick. I do not see any. All right, we've got some oil pressure on our gauge. This gauge is not usually what I put in, but I did it because it's temporary, and I'm just gonna, this one is fully mechanical, and so I need to make sure that the gauge isn't leaking, which I don't see anything. All right, I'm gonna double check we're getting some more pressure. I'm not sure what oil pressure should be on like turning over, but we've got like, it was like 25 PSI oil pressure. So now I'm gonna plug in the crank sensor, I'm gonna check the oil, and we're gonna go for the first startup. Most nerve-wracking part of this is usually the first startup, but that's just how it goes. All right, let's do this. Most likely there's gonna be some smoke, whether that's just from things burning off the exhaust, maybe a possible leak. Hopefully no leaks, but we will see. Yeah, hopefully everything sounds good, and we'll go from there. All right, I don't see any leaks so far. That manifold, I remember, had a lot of fluid on it, and so that's gonna burn off, but I don't see anything dripping yet. We've got 90 PSI of oil pressure, which is good. The engine sounds good. So we're just gonna let it run for a second, and yeah, just continue to check the leaks, continue to listen, continue to watch oil pressure. But there's gonna be a lot of stuff that's gonna burn off. I still don't see any leaks. The check engine light was on from when I had the crank sensor unplugged, so I cleared that and I'm gonna restart it back up. And now we're just wanting to, again, continue to check for leaks. We want to get it to warm up, and then I think we're gonna go drive it. I'm gonna torque these wheels down, and actually, I think I'm gonna swap these wheels to some snow tires, and then we're gonna go take it for a drive. Of course. I hate spilling stuff on new builds. At least I got to run it for a little bit so I can see if there's no leaks, and this will just have to burn off now. Oh, darn it. I cleared the code, and all of a sudden now it's running really lean, and that's why it's running rough. Don't know why. I'm gonna try and figure that out. All right, I'm still not 100% sure what's going on, but basically I hooked up a fuel pressure tester that I've got, and then the car started right up and ran perfectly fine. And the fuel pressure was really high with this regulator, and so I think that I think this regulator might be bad. I'm not 100% sure, but I've got some factory fuel lines here that I'm gonna clean out quick and try. And I guess a regulator can cause excessive high pressure and could cause issues with it running. I'm not sure exactly why, but we'll give this a try. With the factory fuel lines on, it runs totally fine. So I must have a bad regulator on this kit. So maybe I should have just bought brand new. So I'm gonna have to order one of those or see if somebody else has one locally that I can pick up. We're gonna let this thing warm up. Still no leaks, which is great. So I think we're gonna take it on a drive in a little bit.
Good. Oh my gosh. I almost just ran over the cat. You almost just killed your cat.
What?
He hopped out of the car as soon as you started backing out.
The blue one?
Yeah.
Thank you. I gotta put the plate on this thing. I put some snow tires I had just because I don't want to risk slipping and sliding all over the place. We're gonna do 50 miles. If there's any issues, I will try and video. But yeah, I'll do some explaining when I get back on what I did, and we'll go from there. We've got 50 miles on this thing, 49.3. Now we're gonna change the oil and refill it, and that's gonna be it for this video. Always expect a little bit of metal in the oil, as long as there's no massive chunks, but we will take a peek at it. $216 miles, I just turned off. What the heck? Kind of impossible to see on camera, but the oil looks pretty good. Obviously, a little bit of metallic in it for the first oil change because it's a brand new engine, but I see no chunks of metal floating around. So we're gonna say that's a success. And I'm going to new filter, put new oil in it, and I'm probably gonna put an under tray on this thing that I've got, and we'll be on to driving it probably 500 miles, then another oil change, and then probably 1,000 and another oil change, and then we'll talk to the guy who bought this and see if he wants to pick it up or if he wants me to drive it until 3,000 miles. Well, I didn't explain on my drive because I didn't record for the break-in drive. But basically what I'm trying to do for break-in with this thing is first 50 miles, I'm trying to do as much engine braking as possible, not keeping the RPM at a steady level. So I'm not like cruising at 65 for 10 minutes. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to vary the RPM, engine brake as much as possible. So downshift to slow down, and I'm also not getting in much boost, if any at all. That's kind of the main things for break-in, and then change the oil as you saw, and then that's kind of the main part of break-in. But I'm still not getting into a ton of boost. I'm not ripping on the thing, and I'll probably keep it like that for another 900 miles or so, right when I get close to 1,000 miles, and then we'll actually do tuning on this thing. It's got a base map on it and it drives great, but we want to actually tune and get it all the way tuned, so when it goes to the owner, he doesn't have to worry about the tuning at all. But that's kind of the basic premise of break-in. That's what I do with the Subaru OEM blocks. If you buy a block from a company, follow their break-in procedures that they recommend, follow the oil they recommend using, all those sort of things. All right, just like that, 50-mile break-in done, new oil in the car, everything's still looking good. We got our temporary oil gauge here just for the time being. Of course, there's little quirks and stuff that I need to work out, some things with the body I need to work on, things of that sort. But that is gonna end this video. This was, I think, the largest span of time that I've done a video like this, where it was from a bare short block all the way to the car running with break-in done. It was kind of cool to do. If you enjoyed, do all the YouTube stuff, subscribe, like the video, share the video, all those good things. Hopefully you guys are getting your projects done, and I will see you in the next video.